Guys, we've waited for the MCU Phase 4 movies to get here for over a year, and it's finally on its way. The arrival of Black Widow will walk hand in hand with the Disney Plus shows to bring us into a new Thanos-less era of Marvel villainy. So how do you follow a villain like Thanos? Apparently the Marvel strategy is throw literally every awesome villain they have at us. Not a bad strategy. If I were to ask all of you who the best Spider-Man movie villain was, you'd probably all have different answers because there are a lot of awesome Spider-Man villains. If you were to ask me who the best Spider-Man movie villain was, I'd tell you Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2. The humble Otto Octavius turns into a vicious monster after an experiment goes wrong and fuses him with his AI metal arms. Not only does Alfred Molina give one of the best all-time supervillain performances, but the film demonstrated just how epic superhero fight scenes could be. The train fight sequence between him and Tobey Maguire's Spidey is still one of my all-time favorite showdowns. So you can imagine that I'm pretty stoked that Molina's Doc Ock is somehow coming back to torment Tom Holland this time in Spider-Man No Way Home. I know he got a sun dropped on him before he sank into the bay.
It's only a spike! It'll soon stabilize!
But I also don't care. More Doc Ock, please. As far as Avengers villains go, it's really hard to top the likes of Loki, Ultron, and Thanos. Luckily for the MCU, they have yet to adapt one of the fiercest Avengers bad guys, Kang the Conqueror. In simple terms, Kang is a time-traveling megalomaniac who uses technology from the future to attack the past. In not-so-simple terms, he's at least 5 separate Marvel characters depending on what point in the timeline you're looking at. It's complicated. 10 years ago, a villain like Kang would have been crazy choice for the grounded MCU. But now that Marvel's fine with terms like time travel and multiverse,
somewhere in time.
Hot tub time machine.
Hot tub time machine.
The stage is set for Kang's big debut. While it was announced that Jonathan Majors would be playing Kang in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, it seems possible that his introduction may be coming sooner than we think. One of the early episodes of Loki displayed an image of the 3 timekeepers who rule the Time Variance Authority. If you look closely at the keeper in the middle, he bears a striking resemblance to Kang. Is it possible that Kang has already taken over the universe and that the Avengers will have to fight him across time? Knowing Kang, yes, it's very possible. If there's one villain I've been dying to see the MCU take on since Iron Man premiered in 2008, it's the one and only Doctor Doom. While Doom has technically been adapted for the big screen twice already, there really hasn't been a movie version that lives up to the villainous promise Doom provides. To provide my point, here's a comic panel where Doom pulls Thanos' entire skeleton out of his body. I think that sells Doctor Doom more than anything I could say. Knowing that a Fantastic Four movie will close at Phase 4, you just know that means Doctor Doom is on the way. Sure, the first film might have someone else like Annihilus as the main villain, but Victor will at least make a cameo that hints about his villainous turn in later movies. Whether he torments the Fantastic Four or just gives Thanos a smile in the end credits scene, Doom is coming. There's just something about Daniel Bruhl's Zemo that no matter how much we see of him, we always want some more. The original Civil War appearance of Zemo hinted at a criminal mastermind who could single-handedly manipulate the Avengers into attacking each other. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier showed that not only was he an evil genius, but he was also a baron with all the style of James Bond or Batman.
You've been rich?
I'm a baron, son. My family was royalty until your friends destroyed my country.
Not to mention his incredible dance moves. Look at him go! Perhaps the most interesting part of his second appearance was the mask he wore while jumping into a firefight at Madripoor. The show never explained the significance of this mask or why he wears it during violent showdowns, but if we know anything about Marvel by now, it's that any mystery or dangling plot thread is just an opportunity for a future project to pick up and run with. As popular as Zemo turned out to be, it's clear he will return and that he'll bring that mysterious purple mask with him. Now where's your sword and crown? The MCU isn't the only Marvel Cinematic Universe rolling out movies nowadays. After the massive success of Venom in 2018, a sequel was inevitable. Lo and behold, a new Venom movie's on the horizon with none other than Woody Harrelson as Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage. If you don't know anything about Cassidy, just imagine if the Joker had a brother, and that brother had access to a symbiote like Venom. So yeah, he's pretty terrifying. As of right now, the Sonyverse isn't connected to the MCU. Of course, there are a lot of reasons to think that the two universes are about to cross over in some big ways. The other big Sonyverse release, Morbius, will feature Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. We're not sure how the Spidey franchises will cross over in the next few years, but if Carnage does make his way to the MCU, it will likely take both Spidey and Venom to take him down. It's kinda strange to say that the Mandarin will be making his first appearance in Shang-Chi, The Legend of the Ten Rings. In some ways, the Mandarin is the first supervillain who ever made their appearance known in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU literally begins with Tony Stark being attacked by the Ten Rings organization. Since then, there've been several references to the mysterious Mandarin who was pulling the strings all along. We've even seen a fake version of him in the form of Iron Man 3's Trevor Slattery.
Don't hurt the face, I'm an actor.
And Aldrich Killian's proclamation that he was the real Mandarin. Now, well over a decade after he first attacked Stark, we'll finally see his true identity. Not only will we meet Wenwu, the real Mandarin, but we'll see his origin as well. His son, Shang-Chi, looks to be defying his father's wishes to join the Ten Rings. When all the fighting's over, I hope Wenwu's still left standing to terrorize the MCU for another decade to come. Ole, ole, ole. Oh, not that Mandarin? Okay. Spider-Man villains are all the rage in the MCU right now. Tom Holland looks to be taking on all the ghosts of Spider-Man's past. If he really is going to go through all the greatest hits, then he simply has to take on the villain that started it all, William Dafoe's Green Goblin. Rumors have been swirling that Osborn will be joining Doc Ock and Electro in the big Spider-Man free-for-all when No Way Home drops later this year. Even if Dafoe's version of the character isn't on his way, Osborn appearing in the MCU is an inevitability. There are several opportunities for Osborn to appear in the future projects. Whether we're talking about the Dark Avengers or him suiting up in full Goblin armor, Osborn is a natural threat to rise in a post-Thanos world. Just do us all a favor and don't give Gobby green Power Ranger armor this time. If you can cast someone like Dafoe who can make a perfectly terrifying Goblin face for free, why pay money to make a new one, huh? Rumors are that Namor the Submariner will be the primary villain of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. In the comics, Atlantis and Wakanda have been at odds many times. The worst of it came when Namor actually sent a giant wave of water through the entire country, devastating the population. It seems like we might see that horrifying event happen on the big screen when we finally get to return to Wakanda. Sin Nombre actor Tenoch Huerta is rumored to be Marvel's King of Atlantis in 2022. Will he be the one responsible for T'Challa's demise and Shuri's ascent to the Wakandan throne? I guess we'll find out. Unfortunately, I think Rick and Morty may have just beat him to it. I don't know about you, but there was something awfully familiar about Rick's nemesis, Mr. Nimbus. When Namor does finally appear on the big screen for the first time, I sincerely hope there was a lot less pelvic thrusting than there was with Mr. Nimbus. I don't know if I need to see that on the 3D IMAX screen. Wanda Maximoff has been in the MCU since 2015, but the Scarlet Witch just arrived. WandaVision showed us that there's far more to Wanda than just an enhanced Hydra soldier turned Avenger. She's a powerful witch even by powerful witch standards. Agatha Harkness coined the term Scarlet Witch in the MCU as a mythical being who is supposedly more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme. Wanda will be butting heads with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We still don't know if the pair will be teaming up or throwing it down. Judging from that more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme remark, it seems like Wanda may be the movie's villain. If she does take a turn to the dark side, that's bad news for pretty much anyone in her way. She has the ability to cast spells instinctively without the need for incantation. Now that she's been studying the Darkhold, it's likely that she's the most powerful magic user who's ever lived. In the comics, this power was used to unravel all of existence and wipe most mutants out. Who knows, in the movies, it might bring the mutants in instead. While Captain America and Iron Man have finished up their time avenging, it's good to know that we have at least one more adventure with Thor. Hemsworth will be teaming up with Taika Waititi one more time to bring us Thor: Love and Thunder. While the headline for that film is Natalie Portman becoming the mighty Thor, the villain of the movie is equally impressive. Batman himself, Christian Bale, will be returning to the superhero genre, but not as a hero this time. Instead, he'll be playing one of the newest and most impressive Thor villains, Gore the God Butcher. If you couldn't tell by his name, Gore is an alien who hates gods but loves to butcher them. It's all right there in the name. Gore wields a powerful weapon known as the Necro Sword, which has deep ties to not only Thor's story, but to Venom's as well. Gore could prove not only to be the best Thor villain yet, but a link to the Sonyverse as well. Knowing Christian Bale like I do, they probably won't need to use CGI to build Gore's face. He's likely using method acting and some plastic surgery to literally become Gore. You gotta give it to Christian Bale, he really commits. Jamie Foxx was a big deal in 2014. I mean, Foxx is still a big deal, but just 2 years after his legendary turn in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, his stock was at an all-time high. So him signing on to play the main villain in Amazing Spider-Man 2 seemed like a win-win for both him and the new Spidey franchise. Unfortunately, the movie tried to jam 2 other villains into the film, which hurt Fox's Electro considerably. While the Times Square fight is often referred to as a highlight of the film, the fact is the final showdown with Spider-Man was only the prelude to the movie's climax, which made Electro seem like a second-string villain. The MCU looks to be rectifying this by giving Electro another chance to torture Spider-Man yet again, just not the same Spider-Man. If things work out better this time, we may get to see Fox team up with the other all-star Spidey villains in that Sinister Six movie Sony's been wanting to make since Amazing Spider-Man 2. It seems like we've been waiting for Black Widow forever. There's one mystery that's been hanging over the film since the first trailer drop. The mysterious villain, known by his call sign Taskmaster, is a master assassin who studied the fighting techniques of the best warriors in the MCU. He has a little Black Panther, a little Captain America, a little Hawkeye, and probably a lot of everyone in between. We know all that about him, but we still don't know who's really behind the mask, or who's playing him. Marvel's well known for changing their villains around, so who knows who the new master of the Red Room truly is? Well, we'll know before too much longer. Here's to hoping that Taskmaster is worth the wait and he'll survive the film to fight another day. We've seen John Walker get recruited by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine to form her own superhero team for some nefarious purpose. Rumor is that Val's first appearance was supposed to be in 2020's Black Widow. Could Val be enlisting Taskmaster into the same team as the new US agent? The biggest problem with following Thanos is that he was infinitely powerful. I mean, how do you top the guy who was able to take out half of all life in the universe with the snap of his finger? Well, it turns out that the infinitely powerful isn't as infinite as we thought. Loki showed us that there are forces in the MCU that dwarf even what the Infinity Gauntlet brings to the table. In fact, the Time Variance Authority is so unbelievably powerful that low-level staff members use Infinity Stones as paperweights. Just ask this guy.
We actually got a lot of those. Some of the guys use them as paperweights.
While someone like Owen Wilson's Mobius isn't all that threatening, the Time Keepers above him certainly are. We know that they're pruning the timeline so that it meets their ends, whatever that may be. If the Time Keepers or the TVA prove to be the villains everyone thinks they are, the Avengers may be using that endgame technology to have a full-on battle through time itself. Yep, sign me up for that. Can I get some love for Emil Blonsky? The epic villain who had the strength and will to take on the Hulk as a lowly human was promptly shelved after the Incredible Hulk ended. Just like Ed Norton. Ha! Luckily, Blonsky will be back at last to have his revenge. Only this time he might find more Hulks than he knows what to do with. 2022 will introduce us to the newest Green Rage machine in town. Orphan Black's Tatiana Maslany is on board to play Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk. Now that Blonsky's back for another round as the Abomination, it seems likely we'll get another epic throwdown with Hulk that obliterates an entire city block. Seeing as Hulk's arm was in a sling after using the Iron Gauntlet last time we saw him, round 2 might not go as well for him. Professor Hulk may need She-Hulk to tag in to take the Abomination down. Hopefully She-Hulk proves to be a reintroduction to Abomination rather than another case of him getting shelved away for good. Blonsky has a reputation of one of Marvel's greatest villains, and that's just after one movie. Imagine what he could do if they gave him the spotlight. Just like Ed Norton. Ooh, too soon? James Gunn had no idea just what he started when he dropped Adam Warlock's Cocoon in the Collector's Collection when Quill and the gang visited in the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Since then, fans have been desperate to see one of Marvel's best cosmic heroes in the MCU. Then Volume 2 rolled around with good news and bad news. While Adam Warlock didn't make his debut in the film, his appearance was directly set up. Designed to be the perfect member of the Sovereign, Aisha created him with the intent to get revenge on those pesky Guardians. I bet that Adam would not only appear in Volume 3, played by a well-known actor, but he'll serve as the movie's main villain. While Adam Warlock is destined to become a superhero, there's an evil version of the character known as Magus, who could easily serve as a threat for years to come. Knowing that they're alternate versions of Loki and Kang the Conqueror in Marvel Phase 4, Magus really isn't that big of a swing. Knowing that She-Hulk will be taking on Abomination is enough to make me want to watch her Disney Plus series. But Kevin Feige put in another cherry on top of an already appetizing sundae. The Good Place's Jamila Jamil will be playing She-Hulk's arch-nemesis Titania. She's a formidable hand-to-hand combatant who's proven herself more than a match for Jennifer Walters. Knowing the MCU though, I would expect a completely new origin story for the character likely molded to fit Jamil's talent. Every single trailer for Captain Marvel had us fooled. They led us to believe that the green shape-shifting Skrulls were the film's main antagonists. Instead, they ended up as the movie's sympathetic alien race. Carol Danvers ended up taking up their cause and joining them in space. Well, it turns out that while we weren't right about the Skrulls the first time, we were right about them in the long run. Phase 4 will see Nick Fury take the spotlight in his own Disney Plus series, Secret Invasion. We don't know most of the plot details so far, but the comic that's named after is about invasion the Skrulls initiated years earlier to infiltrate various places of power in the Marvel Universe. Chances are that one of the Marvel characters we trust right now is secretly a Skrull sleeper agent. My money's on Sharon Carter. If you were leading a Skrull invasion, it'd be helpful to have all of Madripoor in your back pocket. Plus that twist at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I don't buy it. I could try to tell you just how big of a deal it is that Moon Knight is on the way, but instead I'll show you how Oscar Isaac is training to play Mark Spector. I wouldn't want to be the bad guy facing that fury. Moon Knight's big threat is the villain known as Raoul Bushman. He was the one who betrayed Spectre and led him to becoming the Moon Knight in the first place. Little did he know that this would begin a rivalry that would span decades. If we see their showdown on Disney+, expect it to be a lot less like Captain America fighting a mercenary and more like Netflix's Punisher beating someone to a pulp. It looks like Isaac is well prepared.
You know what's better than seeing superheroes in action? Teases of superheroes in action. Oh yeah, nothing's better than introducing a comic character only for them to not suit up quite yet.
Next time, baby.
Actually, that's agonizing. It kind of hurts the soul a little bit. But hey, maybe the payoff is going to be worth it, right? Today, I'm talking about some of the biggest characters we've seen in the MCU that haven't suited up yet, but could possibly down the line. Red Hulk, Agent Venom, the Black Knight, I'm talking about all of them. So what are we waiting for? I don't want to tease you like the MCU has been doing with these characters, so let's get into it right now.
Suit up.
Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross is surprisingly one of the characters that has been around the longest, even though he's never been given the full spotlight. He was one of the major antagonists in The Incredible Hulk back in 2008, and then after that catastrophe, failed upwards and became the Secretary of State, where he was basically the face of the government bureaucracy that wanted to pass the Sokovia Accords. He then chased after Natasha for a bit, but overall wasn't very successful, and then wanted to arrest Captain America when Nomad Cap popped back up in Infinity War, which also wasn't successful. But hey, after all that failure, he did manage to snag a spot at Tony's funeral, so he has that going for him at least. History tells us that Ross will probably try another horrible idea any day now, and given his track record, I'm so surprised he hasn't taken the steps to turn into his comic book alter ego yet, Red Hulk. Red Hulk is a lot like our Hulk, only he's more intelligent and aware of his surroundings, plus has a tendency to emit a lot of red-hot heat instead of gamma radiation. And given that it's been over a decade since the character's debut in the MCU, is there still a chance we could see Red Hulk? I think it's a toss-up. The biggest thing working against it is actually the actor who plays Red Hulk. William Hurt is no spring chicken. He's in his 70s now, and sure, there's computer magic nowadays where if there is a transformation, William Hurt could just voice him, but who knows? Other than that, story-wise, I could see a scenario where this plays out. The MCU has been teasing the Thunderbolts recently with people like Baron Zemo and Abomination. And although not every incarnation of that special ops team is led by Thunderbolt Ross, there's no way the MCU would pass up a chance to have the character named Thunderbolt Ross be responsible for the Thunderbolts. And picture this scenario. Imagine a Thunderbolts movie that sees Thunderbolt Ross leading a team that consists of Zemo, Abomination, Wong, maybe throw Hawkeye in there just because, etc. Then sometime in the movie, Thunderbolt Ross is exposed to something and becomes Red Hulk, both now leading the team and being a part of it. The only problem with this is I don't see a situation where both Abomination and Red Hulk are on the same team. Who would need two brawlers like that? And thanks to Shang-Chi, it definitely looks like Abomination has bigger plans in the MCU, so I just don't know. Is there a way to make Red Hulk work? Everyone knows that Eddie Brock is Venom, but a character that has only gotten more and more popular over time is Agent Venom, which is the comic storyline that sees Flash Thompson fuse with the Venom symbiote and become his own mercenary-esque soldier. And honestly, because of the complicated relationship between Sony and Disney, I think Agent Venom might actually be the best bet for the MCU. And that brings us to this version of Flash Thompson. If you compare the MCU's Flash to someone like Sam Raimi's Flash, you'll notice some stark differences. For one, Raimi's Flash looks 35 years old and built like a tank and would eventually go on to play Deathstroke. The MCU's Flash Thompson, well, he's specifically not that. He's more of a rich kid bully who is annoying rather than flat out mean. It's hard to think this Flash could become an elite soldier, but maybe that's actually where the storyline comes into play. We know this Flash has a troubled family history full of neglect, and maybe the events of No Way Home, where he now realizes the kid he bullied throughout high school is actually his biggest hero, causes him to reevaluate his life and want to do something good with it. From there, the logical step is the army, and then it's just a matter of time before he crosses paths with the symbiote. It would be fun to see the changes this Flash goes through if he did become Agent Venom, and it would help solve any issues with certain rights. We know Venom Let There Be Carnage teased a collision between Tom Holland's Spidey and Tom Hardy's Venom, but if it becomes becomes too much of a jumbled mess, maybe things will end with Venom back in the Sonyverse, with a piece of him left behind to eventually bond with Flash. That way you could have the Venom symbiote fully in the MCU with Flash Thompson, while also keeping Tom Hardy's version off doing his own thing. Everyone wins. I want to stick with Spider-Man characters for a second and talk about the MCU's Ned Leeds. It's pretty interesting that the MCU decided to make Peter Parker's best friend in high school Ned Leeds, not another character. Sure, Harry Osborn would have been a bit strange and too wrapped up in the lore, but it's not like historically Peter Parker and Ned Leeds were friends in high school. It seemed like they were adapting the Ganke Lee character from the Ultimate Comics, but rather just gave him the Ned Leeds name. Though what's interesting about that is how in the comics, Ned Leeds eventually became one of the versions of the Hobgoblin, one of Spidey's archenemies. Could the MCU have named this character Ned Leeds with the intention of turning him into some sort of villain down the line? I think there's two ways this is possible. The first one is the more traditional route. If the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies really do continue for a brand new trilogy after No Way Home, maybe it gets to the point where Ned starts to want to do more. He already talked about in Homecoming how he would let the spider bite him to give himself powers. Maybe an opportunity arises where he can get his own superpowers from somewhere like Oscorp and things go horribly wrong, causing it to warp his mind and lead him down a path of darkness. Or if you wanted a different scenario, maybe Spider-Man encounters a Hobgoblin Ned Leeds in the multiverse, and he'd be forced to battle a different version of his friend and grapple with those implications. Either way, I think it works. Okay, this one we know for a fact is coming. In the comics, Jane Foster eventually becomes her own version of Thor called Mighty Thor, after being able to lift Mjolnir. When Thor Love and Thunder was announced, one of the big things about it was how Natalie Portman was returning to the franchise to become the Mighty Thor. This was a big shock because after Portman's less than pleasant experience working on Thor the Dark World, and the Thor character was soft rebooted in Ragnarok, it felt like Jane's story was done. But that's not the case anymore, as Mighty Thor will make her grand reappearance soon. How do you guys think this will work? How will Thor and Jane's dynamic change now that she might be more powerful than him? Is this our Jane or a Jane from a different universe? So many questions. While the Eternals movie had one tough task of giving all its main Eternals enough introduction and screen time, it didn't even stop there. It also took time to tease Dane Whitman, who in the comics would go on to become the Black Knight. Now, although I like Kit Harington and thought it was a fun role, I will admit his introduction and backstory felt a little shoehorned into an already jam-packed movie. It had moments where Cersei dropped exposition about Dane's tough relationship with his uncle, and ended with Dane telling Cersei that his family history is a lot more complicated than he thought. And if that wasn't enough a tease, the post-credit scene is devoted to Dane reaching for the ebony blade before a mysterious voice that was later revealed to be Mahershala Ali's vampire hunter Blade interrupts him. That's a lot of teasing, and it's why, although it's not officially confirmed where Dane will pop up again, that the MCU has big plans for the character, so expect the suit up soon. Miles Morales does exist in the MCU. Donald Glover's Aaron Davis mentioned his nephew in Spider-Man Homecoming, and any big fan immediately knew he was talking about the ultimate version of Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And if they mentioned Miles, that means it's only a matter of time before we see him and he starts his own Spidey journey. But who knows when that'll happen. I had a theory that by the end of No Way Home, Peter Parker's Spider-Man would switch over to the Sonyverse and leave Miles Morales the opportunity to step up and be the webhead in the MCU, but I doubt that's the case anymore. With half confirmations that Tom Holland will continue in the MCU, we just have to hope that we eventually get to a point where Peter mentors a young Miles. Though with Peter still being a young teenager himself, that might take some time. Alas, poor Scorpion, I don't know what's going to happen with you. Mac Gargan was introduced in Spider-Man Homecoming, and the post-credit scene teased a team-up with the Vulture. This would seem like it was eventually setting up Gargan to don his signature Scorpion costume and cause trouble for Spider-Man. But now maybe that's not the case. The MCU has changed a lot since Homecoming. Now everything is about the multiverse, and everyone's just focused on Tom Holland teaming up with past Spider-Man in order to fight versions of different franchise villains like Doc Ock and Green Goblin. That kind of makes Scorpion less exciting, right? And with Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes seemingly busy jumping between the Sonyverse and the MCU with his appearance in Morbius, it feels like the Scorpion tease will remain a tease for quite some time. Okay, this one might be a bit of a cheat since we have definitely seen Pepper Potts suit up, but I just don't think it was under the right circumstances. She wore Iron Man armor in Iron Man 3, but that was mostly to get her out of a tough situation, and then we saw her fight side by side with Tony in Endgame wearing her signature rescue armor. Yes, this was cool and all, but it felt a little strange to have no lead up to this. Like, in the 5 years since Infinity War, did Tony and Pepper normally wear their suits and train together? Did Pepper go out on her own to be a hero? Was the Endgame battle the first official time she suited up? I just want to know the backstory, which is why I included Pepper on this list. Yes, we've seen her suit up, but haven't seen the full story behind it, and I think that's important. In the comics, there's a prominent storyline where Shuri takes over the Black Panther mantle from T'Challa and becomes her own version of the character. We didn't get to see Shuri suit up that much in the original Black Panther movie besides some cool Panther bracelets, and she was mostly regulated to the woman in the chair role, assisting T'Challa with tech and new upgrades. But due to the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, all reports point to Shuri suiting up and taking over the lead Black Panther role in the upcoming sequel. Seeing her in the armor will both be exciting, as Shuri is definitely one of the most gifted characters in the entire MCU, but also a little bittersweet given the situation. Spider-Man Homecoming reintroduced a lot of familiar Spider-Man characters as high schoolers. Besides Ned Leeds and Flash Thompson, you also had Betty Brant, a version of Liz Allen who turned out to be Liz Toombs, a new version of Mary Jane Watson, and also a lesser-known character named Cindy Moon. Now, to some, this may seem like a random character, but comic fans know Cindy has a much greater destiny in store. In the comics, Cindy was actually bit by the same spider that bit Peter, and manifested her own Spidey powers. Though, unlike Peter, Cindy was locked away for years in a secret bunker and only emerged much later ready to fight crime as the hero Silk. It's a backstory that I don't think the MCU can adapt now, but the fact that Cindy Moon is in the MCU means anything is possible in terms of Silk's future. Ant-Man and the Wasp was a fun movie on its own, but had the unfortunate issue of releasing after Infinity War and before Endgame. So even though it tried to set up future plot lines, everything was shifted to the side by the end. Like, remember how Scott was in the quantum realm at the end of the movie because he was specifically gathering materials to help Ghost from perishing? You kind of gotta hope that Ghost was one of the ones snapped away for 5 years, or else she definitely didn't survive until Endgame. But the movie ended with Dr. Bill Foster declaring that he wouldn't abandon Ghost and ran away with her, leaving his story open-ended. In the comics, Bill Foster suits up as the superhero Goliath, a character who grows in size. Foster in the MCU talked about how he experimented with size back in the day, but it's something we never got to see. But with how crazy Quantum Mania sounds, maybe we'll see a clip of Goliath suiting up. So this one only technically counts a little bit. The Incredible Hulk teased the appearance of the Leader, but we haven't seen that resolution, at least in live action. There was a comic that revealed that right after Samuel Stearns was infected with Hulk blood, his intelligence suddenly went through the roof. But Black Widow actually showed up and captured him. But that's a comic, so I count that as not fully seeing him suit up. I just want to see his big green head in the MCU. Is that too much to ask? I don't think it is. And you would think that the MCU has moved on from the Incredible Hulk villains, but with Abomination returning at least twice in Phase 4, why couldn't the Leader pop up again? What I love about comics is that whenever a character ages out of a role or takes up a different name, there's usually someone else that can take over the old mantle. When we first met Sam Wilson, he was the Falcon and worked loyally as Captain America's partner. But then Endgame happened and Sam found himself presented with the opportunity to be the new Captain America. Although it took a whole Disney Plus show for the circumstances to work, Sam is indeed the new Captain America in the MCU. But where does that leave the Falcon moniker? Well, it doesn't look like it will be empty for long. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier show introduced Joaquin Torres, a young soldier who bonded with Sam and helped out when necessary. In the comics, Torres does become the Falcon after Sam, and it does sort of seem like the show was teasing this development as well. I mean, after Sam gets his new fancy vibranium Captain America suit, he tells Torres he can keep the broken wings. If that's not a tease for Torres to fix them up and wear them himself, I don't know what is. How cool would it be to see Sam mentor a new Falcon? That sounds awesome. We've been introduced to a lot of potential young Avengers in the MCU in Phase 4, and one of the most exciting is Eli Bradley, the grandson of Isaiah Bradley, who we met in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show. Eli has a complicated history in the comics, first lying about how he had the super soldier serum in him before eventually getting it through a blood transfusion with his grandfather. It feels like all these young Avengers teases are just too much of a coincidence at this point for the MCU to not follow through, and I really hope that means Eli Bradley's Patriot has a big role coming up in the future. Avengers Endgame changed so much in the MCU, but one of the more subtle changes is the aging up of Scott Lang's daughter, Cassie Lang. In the comics, Cassie Lang becomes Stature, a hero just like her father who can manipulate her size and also becomes part of the Young Avengers. In the Ant-Man movies, the young Cassie was enthusiastic about becoming a superhero like her dad, but it was clear she was way too young to fully suit up yet. But now that 5 years have passed since Endgame, and presumably maybe 1 or 2 more will go by in the timeline before Ant-Man Quantumania takes place, it means Cassie is now an age-appropriate teen superhero who can join her father on the battlefield. And given that Cassie was recast in Ant-Man Quantumania, chances are the MCU has a bigger role for her to play down the line. Get ready for Stature. The Avengers roster is only going to get bigger now that the multiverse and the cosmos are all fair game, and that's great news for us fans. But just which new heroes that we've met so far would make the best fit on the Avengers squad rather than flying solo? And which heroes haven't we met could make a huge entrance in Phase 4 and earn their place on Earth's mightiest heroes? Well, that's what I want to discuss today. Let's get started right now. I'm going to start off with some heroes who we already met in Phase 4 but haven't officially joined the Avengers team yet, but are on their way to becoming full-fledged members. So with that in mind, of course I gotta start with Shang-Chi. With a wonderful origin story that ended with the martial artist becoming the proud owner of a set of powerful rings with unknown origin, I think it's safe to say that Shang-Chi will have a huge role in whatever future version of the Avengers we see next. You know, I guess technically Katie got an invitation too, even though she just learned how to use a bow like a week earlier. Hey, maybe they're just in desperate need of a new archer. Could Loki end his final arc in the MCU as a full-fledged Avenger? That would certainly be a fun piece of symmetry. He started the franchise as the one who forced the Avengers to assemble in the first place, and then was utterly destroyed by them. But now that he's on this I'm a good guy in a tie now kick trying to save the multiverse, I think it's only a matter of time before he joins up officially with the Avengers to protect the entire universe. Could you imagine the snarky Asgardian's feelings after realizing he has to become an official Avengers member? He'd probably hate it, but I think the delight we'd feel as an audience is enough to overpower that. Right now, Yelena is working for Valentina Allegra de Fontaine and is seemingly on a quest to eliminate Hawkeye as revenge for what happened to Natasha. But we all know that things won't stay this way. After the two get this misunderstanding sorted, will Yelena just go back to being a hired gun? Or will she actually follow in her sister's footsteps to become the Black Widow of the Avengers team? I hope for the latter one because given her attitude and general demeanor, I'd love to see how she interacts with a big group. Hey, every Avengers team needs a good spy who knows how to be stealthy, right? The Fantastic Four is Marvel's most important family, and some of the biggest comic storylines involving world-ending threats usually involve the Fantastic Four in some way. We know they're on their way as Spider-Man director John Watts has been tapped to direct the MCU's version of Fantastic Four, but the big question isn't who is going to play these characters, but rather how these characters are going to fit into the established MCU. They presumably have to come from a different universe at this point, and if that's the case, then will they want Avengers membership right away? Or do you think they'll want to operate on their own for a bit before a big team up? I mean, they have their hands full already that they don't exactly need the Avengers. Everyone was surprised when, in what feels like 9 years ago at this point, Kevin Feige announced Academy Award winner Mahershala Ali was playing Blade in the MCU. Now, we don't exactly know what Blade's deal will be in the MCU, but it looks like he's going to have ties with another character who I'll mention next. Blade only joined the Avengers in the comics relatively recently when vampires started to become a problem in the world. Are we going to see something similar happen? Are vampires going to start overrunning everything, forcing the Avengers to turn to the one man who probably knows more about the creatures than anyone? Yeah, maybe Blade can join right after a fight with the Sonyverse's Morbius. Amidst all the Eternals drama, another supporting character got a bit of an origin story. Kit Harington's Dane Whitman popped up for just long enough for audiences to get a general gist of where he was heading. His family history is complicated, his uncle's a mysterious dude, and now he has in his possession a sinister artifact. Comic fans know this as the Ebony Blade, and it grants Dane the ability to become the Black Knight. With Blade's voice popping up at the end of Eternals, you know bigger things are planned for Dane, and having him eventually join the Avengers would be a cool way to add some medieval flair to the group. Or will he and Blade team up to form their own team? Only time will tell. One of the most hotly anticipated characters coming down the pipeline is Moon Knight, played by Oscar Isaac. Moon Knight is definitely one of the most quirky Avengers in the MCU, and I'm sure whatever adventure he ends up going on will be full of mayhem and mischief. But the big question is, will he eventually join the Avengers? Honestly, he's a tough sell. Not because he lacks talent, but because he's such an offbeat hero that I don't know how he would vibe with Earth's mightiest heroes. Maybe it'll be a package deal. Maybe Moon Knight, Blade, and the Black Knight could all team up and then join the Avengers, sort of in the same way the Guardians of the Galaxy did in Infinity War and Endgame. The mutants are coming. With the inevitability of the X-Men arriving in the MCU, presumably from a different universe, there's probably going to be an initial clash between the Avengers and Professor X's team. But after everyone walks away as friends, could we see everyone's favorite Canadian cigar-chomping, adamantium-infused mutant join the Avengers? I think Wolverine would be the perfect character to both be a part of the X-Men as well as an official member of the Avengers team. It allows him to be a liaison between the two sides to make sure there are no misunderstandings or miscommunications. Plus, seeing him on the same side as the Hulk in some capacity would just be a delight for fans everywhere. The post-credit scene for Eternals introduced a surprising new character, Thanos' brother, Star Fox. Now, in the comics, Star Fox is problematic in a lot of ways, and although he's lived a lifestyle where he likes to just relax, party, and seduce women, he has joined the Avengers from time to fulfill that heroic itch. Is this where the character's introduction in Eternals leads? Like, how ironic would it be if after the Avengers had to assemble to stop the biggest threat the universe had ever seen in Thanos, a little while later, Thanos' brother Eros, aka Star Fox, joins the Avengers to help fight evil. Sure, it probably would have been better to have him for the Infinity War or Endgame battle, but he was probably busy partying it up on some alien planet or something. The superhero Nova hasn't been exactly teased yet, but it's surprising we've gotten no mention of him. The first Guardians of the Galaxy introduced the Nova Corps, but then the Corps were destroyed off-screen in Infinity War. That actually does lead the way for Nova to show up in full force. Say there were a few survivors of the Nova Corps, and in order to make sure they're never attacked like this again, they infuse one of the remaining members with the Nova Force in order to be their champion. This is a way to get Nova into the MCU, and maybe after teaming up with Captain Marvel or something, he could join the inevitable Space Avengers. Sentry is one of the strongest heroes in the Marvel Universe. I mean, he's been described as having the strength of 1,000,000 exploding suns. Of course he's powerful. He also has one of the most unique comic histories out of any hero, as he lives with the fact that as long as he's around, his evil alter ego known as the Void will also continue to grow more powerful. Now that the Hulk seems permanently hurt and Thor and Captain Marvel are off on their own space adventures, the Avengers will need a heavy hitter on their team who likes to stay on Earth. Sentry is perfect for that, and he could be one of the most valuable assets for the Avengers. I mentioned the Hulk being sidelined, so how about a new Hulk steps up? We know She-Hulk is getting her own Disney Plus show, and it will focus more on the lawyerly side of things rather than a straight-up superhero fight show. But will that segue into Jennifer Walters joining the Avengers? Like, yes, she's super strong, and you don't want to mess with her, but also, I think it's about time the Avengers had a good lawyer on their side. The heroes tend to get into a lot of messy situations from a legal standpoint, so it might help to have a practicing lawyer on their payroll. Ghost Rider is a fantastic character who deserves more time to shine in the MCU. Yes, the Robbie Reyes version had a memorable arc on the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, but that seems to have been written out of the official MCU canon. Ghost Rider's powers and skills would make him a unique asset on the Avengers team, and the superheroes would have to decide if they could let someone as uncontrollable and frankly a little scary looking as Ghost Rider into their Avengers club. Come on, tell me you wouldn't want to see Ant-Man sitting next to Ghost Rider at the Avengers monthly meetup. That's comedy gold, I tell you. If Deadpool ever makes it over to the MCU, you just know the first thing he'd do is try to become a full-fledged Avenger. He would know that being an Avenger is where the real money is and work hard to be noticed by people like the new Captain America in order to get a spot on the team. The problem with Deadpool on the Avengers is that he might be a little too zany and off the wall for people to take him seriously. Like, he'd be talking to Bruce Banner and then Bruce would have to watch him turn to no one and start talking to a pretend audience. We've already seen the X-Men avoid Deadpool, so why wouldn't the Avengers do the same? I can imagine a scenario where Deadpool slowly sneaks around and tries to appear in the background of Avengers missions in order to boost his credibility. It's heavily hinted that Namor will be the main villain of the upcoming Black Panther 2, which is interesting because Namor is a character who's been both a good and bad guy in the past. If he is indeed the villain of Black Panther 2, will he have a shot of redemption later on? Like, will he eventually get to a place where he is a valuable member of the new Avengers lineup? I could see a situation where he's mad at Black Panther, Wakanda, and the whole world, but decides the best way to implement the changes he wants is by actively contributing to world events and fighting alongside the Avengers in order to get things done. Plus, the Avengers need a water guy. WandaVision ended with Monica Rambeau getting unique powers and becoming a superhero in her own way. In the comics, she's had a bunch of monikers like Spectrum, Photon, and even was Captain Marvel for a while. What if the OG Captain Marvel continues to be too busy dealing with cosmic threats to spend a lot of time on Earth, and therefore Spectrum sorta takes her place on the Earthbound Avengers team in order to keep the planet safe? That would be a cool way to connect the Earth Avengers with the ever-growing Space Avengers, as the bonds between Spectrum and Captain Marvel can continue to be explored. Look, who knows what's happening with Peter Parker's Spider-Man right now? We know Sony and Disney have a complicated relationship, and the future of the webhead is still up in the air. What if the MCU needs to write Peter Parker out, but still wants to use a Spider character in live action? Well, that's where Miles Morales comes in. We already know Miles exists in the MCU, and if No Way Home ends with Peter out of this universe and exploring the multiverse, the Avengers can just call on another Spider-Man in order to fill that void. It allows for Sony and Disney to be happy, as well as keep a version of Spider-Man around in the MCU. Everyone wins. Another hero who's about to make a big impact on the MCU is Ms. Marvel. We already know that she's not only going to get her own Disney Plus TV show, but she's also set to co-star in the Captain Marvel sequel, which is now titled The Marvels. Her powers are unique enough where she's going to make an amazing hero, but the question is if she's just a little too young to join the Avengers properly. Like, Tony Stark isn't around anymore to randomly decide that teenagers should be Avengers anymore, so does Ms. Marvel have a chance? I think it's possible given her skills, but also she could very likely be a member of the Young Avengers, which would be a subset of the Avengers and still counts for this list. While Venom is on his own multiverse adventure of some sort, there's still a way to get the Venom symbiote onto the MCU's Avengers team, and that's through Agent Venom. Agent Venom is Flash Thompson in the comics, who becomes a top soldier for the government after absorbing the Venom symbiote. I think it would just be fascinating to see the MCU's version of Flash Thompson become Agent Venom. From everything we've seen so far, this Flash isn't as tough as previous versions, but he also has a deeply traumatic backstory that deserves to be explored more. Merging him with some version of the Venom symbiote would force him to step up and be a true hero, especially if he wanted to be part of the Avengers one day. Fans are clamoring for Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock to return to the MCU after giving an amazing Daredevil performance in the Netflix era of shows that we don't talk about anymore. And the Devil of Hell's Kitchen would be the perfect street-level perspective that the Avengers probably need right now. A lot of Avengers are these larger-than-life superheroes dealing with huge universe-ending problems, but adding someone like Daredevil to the team would give them a different viewpoint of the world. Like in Spider-Man Homecoming, Adrian Toomes had been getting away with street-level crime for a while because the Avengers were too busy dealing with huge threats. So I think that's why a Daredevil addition, as well as any of the Defenders really, would be valuable. Because the multiverse is truly exploding, I think it's time to bring in Captain Britain. Not only is he a fun, awesome superhero in his own right, but he's usually part of the Captain Britain Corps, which is an interdimensional organization that basically ensures there's a Captain Britain in every universe. It would be a good anchor point to all the crazy multiverse shenanigans we're about to witness if we had a Captain Britain on the Avengers. The Hawkeye TV show is set to introduce Echo, a brilliant fighter who possesses photographic reflexes that allow her to copy fighting techniques she sees. It's rumored that Echo kicks so much butt in the Hawkeye show that she's going to get her own spin-off series. And why stop there? If she's that popular, she could see herself on the path to full-fledged Avengers membership. And while her fighting style would normally put her on the weaker end of the Avengers power level, let's not forget that Echo also becomes a host for the Phoenix Force, which is one of the most powerful forces in the entire universe. So yeah, better recruit her now. When Endgame skipped ahead 5 years, one of the major differences was when Scott Lang suddenly came back, he found his daughter was now 5 years older. That's tough for any parent, but good news for us, since it means Cassie Lang is now one step closer to becoming the superhero known as Stature. Like her father, she eventually uses Pym particles to become a hero that can both shrink and grow, so she can easily fill Ant-Man's shoes whenever Paul Rudd gets too old to play the part. But who am I kidding? Paul Rudd is ageless. Kate Bishop is getting the spotlight incredibly soon thanks to the Hawkeye TV show, and with all signs pointing to this being Hawkeye's swan song, does this mean that Kate will step up and take over the Hawkeye mantle? Hopefully. And while the Avengers always need someone like a Hawkeye to keep them grounded, perhaps Kate Bishop's Hawkeye would be better suited for the Young Avengers alongside heroes like Ms. Marvel and Stature. Now the question is Kate Bishop capable of leading the Young Avengers, or should she be a supporting character like Hawkeye was on the OG Avenger team? As I mentioned before, Thor is off doing his own space adventures for a bit, so that leaves the Earth Avengers without a true powerhouse. Well, that's where a Greek god like Hercules could come into play. Hercules actually has a long history in the MCU, and while the franchise hasn't introduced the other Greek gods, I think Hercules would be a solid first choice. Mainly because having Hercules on the Avengers team would hopefully dissuade Disney from making a live-action remake of the Hercules property. I'd rather see Hercules fighting Marvel villains than see that animated film remade into live action, wouldn't you agree? You think The Watcher ever wants to stop watching and be an Avenger for a bit? I mean, come on, he made himself a fancy superhero suit to fight Ultron. Of course he wants to be part of the team. Come on, Watcher, break your oath to not interfere for like the 14th time and come join in the fun.